according to John. Listen to it. See if there's not something in this beautiful passage which touches you and your own living. I am the true vine, and my heavenly parent, grower, who cuts off every branch in me that doesn't bear fruit, but prunes the fruitful ones to increase their yield. You've been pruned already, thanks to the word that I have spoken to you. Live on in me as I do in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit of itself apart from the vine, neither can you bear fruit apart from me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who live in me and I in them will bear abundant fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. Those who don't live in me are like withered, rejected branches and thrown on the fire and burned. If you live on in me, and my words live on in you, ask whatever you want, and it will be done for you. My God will be glorified if you bear much fruit and thus prove to be my disciples. As my heavenly parent has loved me, so have I loved you. Live on in my love, and you will live on in my love if you keep my commandments, just as I live on in God's love and have kept God's commandments. I tell you all this, that my joy may be yours, and your joy may be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends, and you are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer speak of you as subordinates, because a subordinate doesn't know a superior's business. Instead, I call you friends, because I have made known to you everything I have learned from God. It was not you who chose me. It was I who chose you to go forth and bear fruit. Your fruit must endure, so that whatever you ask of the heavenly parent in my name, God will give you. This command I give you.
That's one of those verses that alternates between being very beautiful and comforting and very disturbing. How we approach it's going to make a big difference. I just want to warn you before I start. Later today, I'm on a panel at the Islamic Center on the subject of pain. And rather than doing two different things poorly, I decided to try to put the two together. So we're looking at the problem of suffering, but in a larger sense of the purpose of is there purpose in life? And I'm asking this post-Darwin, taking Darwin as seriously as we can. I believe that religion, obviously I chose this craft, so I believe in it. But I also think it creates a lot of problems when it's not done very well. And I think a lot of the dilemmas that tear people apart are based on religion that is too narrow in its understanding. If we listen to this story as a person like us talking to us, and it's saying things like you're going to get cut off if the fruit's bad, I wouldn't be interested in that religion. I would have been gone. If I took it like that, I would have been gone. I believe Jesus was a mystic and a consummate poet, and he's talking not only about life, but he's speaking as life. He's personifying the depth that we're seeking, the interconnectedness that we're seeking. I believe this is a poem where Jesus is leading you not to himself as a human being, but to the ground of your own being, the ground of your own source. When we're taught a creationist view of life, of the world, when we're taught that a humanoid being crafted the world especially for us, loves us, but slipped in leukemia and tapeworms into the creation, we have some problems absorbing that and making that consistent. In fact, it's impossible to remedy it. The idea that God is all loving and all kind in this world, there's some play in the steering wheel, to put it very nicely. Very often what preachers like me do when this subject comes up is we start off talking about why. Why is there suffering? Why? And then shift gears, not even aware of it. The question, how? How do we cope with this? How do we make sense of it? Well, that's a very important question. The question of who am I in this crisis is a very important question. That's not the one I'll be talking about today. I think the question why is also a very important question. And I think usually we kind of bail out of the question. Because after Darwin, we have some real challenges. If the world wasn't created for us, if there are random processes taking place, then how do we feel safe? How do we feel like our life does have purpose? How do we go on? Now, one of the greatest defenses of creation was Paley's metaphor of the watch, that if you see a watch or any other complex thing, you know that something created it. Like if there's a watch, there has to be a watchmaker, according to Paley. What Darwin discovered is you can have very complex processes in life, and you don't need a creator to make that happen. Imagine you walk along and you see a truck and it's got the top layer is red balls, the middle one is white, and the bottom is blue. Red, white, and blue. Now, if there are no exceptions to that, if all the layers are pure at their color, you would have to assume somebody did that. One little detail. Well, I said, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, the top layer, the red balls, are all golf balls. The middle layer, the white balls, are all softballs. And the bottom layer, the blue balls, are all bowling balls. And the truck drove here over a gravel road. Okay, there's a process where that's just going to happen. It may look designed, but it's the system, it's the process that made it happen. Now, here's the thing. To believe that a humanoid, invisible being, supernatural being, designed everything for us. But at some level, I think we all know that doesn't work. If that's also the source of other types of animals, but it looks like a human being, that's not good for the other animals, right? A dolphin thinks God has a hole in its head, right? I mean, the horses think that God has 4 legs. Of all being has got to be invisible and not like one of the particular beings. When we think of life as a whole and bring nature and the processes of nature into it, one of the crises of the church, the reason the church is on the wrong side of environmental issues for the most part, is that we've left nature out of the calculations. Creationism doesn't account for that. And so when many evangelicals hear this crisis is happening, what they say is, well, you don't trust God. God made everything. You just need to surrender responsibility and trust God. Well, we know that even though acorns are designed to be oak trees, a lot of them fall on the sidewalk. God may care for the birds of the air, but a lot of them hit against the windows during preachers' sermons, and you just block it out. You probably walk through fields where you see dead birds in the field. So whatever those symbols mean, they're deeper than just our story as human beings on planet Earth. The image Jesus is going to use is, now this is important because creationism is based on what's called the teleological argument. The argument that life has purpose because God created it for purpose. That's also called the problem of the many and the one. How do you put the pieces of life together? Is it a random process, or is there something behind it that groups it? A tree is both many and one. So when Jesus says, I'm the vine, you are the branches, he's initiating us into the real life process. I don't believe Jesus came to make us Presbyterian. At least I hope not. I don't believe he came to make us Christian. I think he came to call us into deeper living and into deeper loving. And I think you can do that as a Presbyterian, or I wouldn't be here. But what happens is people teach what Jesus says as though it were true at the literal level. And so people don't get the initiation. They don't find the meaning. So Jesus is speaking as life, as the tree of life, and helping you to find your place on it. The good news is you're already on it. When Jesus says the word, logos, the word, he's not saying this is something you have to figure out or seek and find. He's not saying you have to drum up loving feelings and then you'll be okay. You have to produce this fruit. What he's saying is this wisdom is written into your flesh. This wisdom is what begot you. Did I say that right? Begot. So what he's doing is not telling you to drum up your energies and work harder to find this hiding God. It's that you're already on the tree and you need to grow out of that. He's going to use the word to remain in something 13 times. The same Greek word in this little paragraph is used 13 times. So that's kind of important. Trust your connectedness to things. When we look at the world, it looks like process. This is an illusion. Every spiritual teacher teaches us this is an illusion. You are not lost. You're not alone. You are interwoven in things. We remember the way home. We remember the depths. It was Vincent van Gogh that said the way to know God is to love many things. So if you don't like people very well, but you love kittens, start with kittens. If kittens get on your nerve, but you like trees, start there. But let the love expand. Get the fact that everything is interconnected. That you can't love one part of life and reject the other parts of life, which includes birth and death. I don't know that a week goes by, and I'm working on the sermon, that I don't think about the fact that someday you're going to be on your deathbed, and you're going to need to know the way home. I think about that all the time. As a minister, I've been with hundreds of people who died. And I don't think it says anything bad about a person if the pain is too great, if the fear is too great. There are things we're not in control of. But if we know that we're going back to the same source that gave us birth, if we know we don't have to hold on to anything or do anything right, Because your way out may include dementia, a brain aneurysm. And if you're planning on reciting the Apostles' Creed so Jesus recognizes you, that may not be in the wheel of possibilities. He's talking about trusting your source. Maybe that's a humanoid God. But I think whatever it is what gave us being in the first place. And if we can't trust that, I don't know what sense life would make anyway. I want to read a couple of quotes from Stoics. Marcus Aurelius was very important to me in trying to figure these things out. I think sometimes it's hard to hear what Jesus is saying because we hear him in the categories the church gave us. And so we're thinking, okay, this is just an arrogant God, but you can't point that out. Right? Love me, worship me, follow me, do it my way, or my dad's going to cut you off. Now, it's different if you realize that this is cosmic poetry. Because it's important to know that time is going to cut you off. And the things that we do in hatred and the things we do in love are going to have very different consequences than maybe what we intend and what we plan. This is the Stoics that existed before and after Christianity had the notion that we're cells in a common body. Very similar to what Jesus is saying. This is Marcus Aurelius. Just as with the limbs of the body in individual organisms, rational beings likewise in their separate bodies are constituted to work together in concert. He says we're like the teeth that work together, even if it seems in opposition, the fingers that work together. This will strike you more forcibly if you say to yourself again and again, I am a limb. See the same, Jesus said branch, he says limb, of the common body formed by all rational beings. If, however, by changing a single letter you call yourself a part, this is a pun, but it's the difference between a mechanical part and an organic part. If you think of yourself mechanistically as just a part, like a billiard ball bouncing around, you're missing the point that you're an organ in this common life. Your life doesn't make sense. A spleen probably doesn't have that great, thrilling life. Right? Outside, when you look at life from the outside in, there's no purpose. But if you realize that we evolved together, then the purpose is very clear. We serve each other. He says, if, however, by changing a single letter you call yourself a part, you have not learned to love your fellow human beings with all of your heart, nor do you yet rejoice in doing good for its own sake, for you are still doing it simply as a duty, and not yet in the conviction that you are thus doing good to yourself. Like Buddha, somebody like Jesus is not different than us in terms of physicality. They just knew that we're all interwoven. And so it's in our interest to be kind, to be loving, to be compassionate. Because that common life, it goes around. Aurelius also said, there's nothing that's good for the bee that is not good for the hive. Don't you wish people knew that in Washington? There's nothing that's possibly good for the United States that is not good for the people of El Salvador or Venezuela. That is sanity. I think what, in kind of a nutshell, is that love finishes the stories that life can only begin. Your life will not be big enough and long enough to make sense in most cases. There's a wonderful story about, I don't remember if they're butterflies or moths, but they migrate. But it's over thousands of miles, and no one of the moths makes it all the way through the journey. Every one of their lives are incomplete. And in a sense, meaningless if you don't look at the whole. That it's that interconnected web that gives our life purpose, meaning, and a deeper joy. It's like in astronomy. everything's blowing up, and sometimes the stars that last the briefest bring the most important elements into the scenario. But in astronomy, everything counts. In biology, everything is interconnected. So you can't look at your life and say it was short, therefore it did not have meaning. I've been with at death. I love Marcus Aurelius and those kind of people, but my true mentors were people that were dying. People who had cancer. I remember one woman that I'd go to visit her, and the first thing she would always say is, "How's so-and-so doing?" That's not where I would be in that circumstance, most likely. There was a guy named E.W. Renner that was like that. And he was originally called Mr. St. Andrews. When I first got here, he was the person that greeted everybody and said hello, and he just emptied himself in loving other people. As he was in a retirement home, and his family couldn't be there at that time, and so he's sitting there dying in the bed. He's gone blind. He's got a country western station on that you can barely, you just hear this occasional twang, and he's sitting there tapping his foot. Now that's wisdom, right? That is wisdom. It's not something we can always do, but that's somebody who knew the way home. Danny Gladney was a teenager with brain cancer who passed away here. And he would come by for counseling, but he was much wiser than I. And he knew he was going to die. He didn't like that, but he wanted the rest of his life to be a gift. And so we would sit there and think about how I can use that time. Again, that's the way home. The first part of life, it's taken, enjoying. But at some point, we realize we're going back. And there's less and less joy in holding on to things. In fact, at some point, it's what we're holding back from life that hurts us, that makes us feel impoverished, that terrifies us. Socrates said the purpose of philosophy is to practice dying. I think that's saying a little too, I wouldn't go that far. But I understand what he means. That the ultimate wisdom is knowing the way home. Not lifting death out of the circle of life. Not saying birth is good, but death is bad. To realize that the whole thing is a part of a larger dance. And even if I'm one of those that's treated completely unfairly, and some of you are in that situation, life has been cruel. It's been unfair. But not to forget that you're still part of a cosmic hymn. And that even if you can't say yes to life for yourself, you can say yes to that whole beautiful dance, at least some of the time. At least you can remember this is the way home. Nothing is good for the bee that is not good for the hive. Jesus is saying you are bigger than you think you are. And you are not this frightened observer of life. You are life. You're the same thing I am, he's saying. That's why I'm not going to call you student anymore. I've told you everything that I learned from God. Now that doesn't get preached very much, does it? I've asked you to come here because I'm handing it over to you. I've taught you everything I know. You are life. You are the dance. Even if you can't do it when you face your death, even if you're too afraid or you're in too much pain, it almost doesn't matter because it's written in you. You are a song the universe is singing. You don't have to remember to do so. If you can't remember Jesus' name, that's going to be okay. Because he was never talking about himself. It was always about life and your own depths. Marcus Aurelius said it like this. He said, pass through this brief patch of time, talking about our life, time, in harmony with nature, and come to your final resting place gracefully, just as a ripened olive might drop, praising the earth that nourished it, and grateful to the tree that gave it growth. He also said, wait for death with a cheerful mind, for it is according to nature, and nothing is evil that is according to nature. We can't always do that. But how helpful and wonderful it is to remember you're part of a larger life. It wouldn't be good news if you had to do something right. If you had to remember something, if you had to say Jesus' name. It's more wonderful than that. There are people I've known who died very unfair deaths. But I could not have given this sermon had I not known them. There's a sense in which every time I preach E.W. Renner. Their love taught me. And I hate to break this to you, but you'll be coming to my service at some point down the road. At least some of you. That will be your feeling. That I have emptied my life into something that gave you joy and something that you could pass on down the road. If we look at life just from a human perspective, it can be unfair and meaningless. When we look at the whole of life, at the web of life, at the cosmic process, is a testament to this cosmic process. I believe Jesus is trying to plant a seed in our heart that says love finishes the stories begin. I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.